Ma'am, we are starting then.
Yes,
So, with your
our
permission.
sir, yes, sir also joined now, so you can start.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. I, Oindrila Shengupta, in charge of the Department of English of THK Jain College, welcome today's honorable speaker, Professor Dr. Shubir Kumar Dhar, our respected principal, Dr. Moushumi Singh Shengupta, all the participants from other institutions, and our dear students in today's webinar. 2022 is going to be the glorious 75th year of Indian independence. In these 75 years, India has evolved in many ways. THK Jain College has planned to celebrate and observe this multifaceted growth and evolution of Indian India through organizing a lecture series involving various departments of this college. Today, Department of English of THK Jain College is organizing the second session of this series to observe the evolution of Indian literature and culture in the last 75 years. And I'm really glad to announce today we have with us Professor Dr. Shubir Kumar Dhar as the honorable speaker. It is a privilege for all of us. The rest of the session will be moderated by Professor Deepayan Datta and Professor Swara Thakur. After the main speech, there will be a short interactive session which will be moderated by Professor Swara Thakur. And I request all the participants to mute the audio and switch off the video to avoid the network glitches. During the interactive session, participants can post their questions through the Google Meet chat box and YouTube live chat. And now, without any delay, I would like to request our Honorable Principal Ma'am to say a few words to inaugurate the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Professor Indrila Shengupta, for your introductory speech. Now, good evening, everyone. It is with great pleasure that I welcome all of you to today's webinar on evolution of Indian literature and culture in the last 75 years, which is organized by the Department of English as a part of the celebration of 75 years of Indian independence. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our honorable speaker, Professor Dr. Shubir Dhar, Director, School of Humanities and School of International Languages, Sister Nivedita University, Newtown, Kolkata. I am very honored, sir, that Professor share his insightful observations and thoughts on how the Indian literature and culture have evolved over the years since independence with our students, scholars, and faculty members. We are all looking forward to an enriching and stimulating discussion on the topic, and I am sure that will benefit the participants. And for taking this initiative, I am really particularly grateful to all the faculty members of Department of English, like Professor Oin Vilashin Gupta, the convener and head of Department of English, Professor Swara Thakur, and Professor Deepayan Dotto, and all other faculty members who are involved with this great, I mean, the task. Now and I am also thankful to the for technical support which is provided for organizing this webinar, to all the, I mean, the which is basically which are behind this planning and organizing this webinar for their technical support. Now, I'm really thankful once again to our Professor Dhar for gracing this occasion, and I'm sure that event will be a great success. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Doipal, let me know when I get.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Am I audible, everyone?
Yes.
Yes. Very good evening, sir. I have the honor of introducing our speaker, honorable speaker for today. So I'll do that. Uh, Professor Dr. Shubhit Dhor is an internationally renowned scholar who has taught for nearly 35 years in Robindra Bharati University, Kolkata, India, serving as the director of the university's School of Languages and Culture, the honorary director of the Tagore Gandhi Center, and as the head of the English department. He has also the distinction of serving for a time as the officiating vice chancellor of Robindra Bharati University. He is at present Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Director of the School of International Languages in Sister Nivedita University, Newtown, Kolkata. Professor Dhor has been a Charles Wallace Trust Fellowship awardee and conducted research on William Blake in Cambridge University. He has made academic presentations in Oxford University, Ohio State University, and ULAB Bangladesh, and participated in academic interactions with faculty in Morris College, USA, Colorado University, and the University of Denver. He is at present an external member in the Board of Studies of the English departments of Banaras Hindu University, Northeastern Hill University, and Rani Rashmoni Green University. He has had the distinction of having delivered conference keynote addresses, refresher courses, orientation courses, and faculty lectures throughout India in at least 14 states, including Andhra Pradesh, Assam, Bihar, Delhi, Jharkhand, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Manipur, Mizoram, Puducherry, Odisha, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, etc. He has published 6 books and scores of research papers in the specific fields of Shakespeare studies, British Romanticism and the poetry of William Blake, popular culture studies, Australian and Canadian writing, post-colonial literatures including the writings of Salman Rushdie, Arundhati Roy, V.S. Naipaul, Amit Chaudhary, etc. Tagore literature and contemporary Indian writing in English, translation studies, etc. His areas of special interest include critical theory, semiotics, hermeneutics, critical pedagogy, gelatology, and so on. He is currently the co-editor of 2 UGC care-listed journals and is the honorary general secretary of the Shakespeare Society of Eastern India. So it is, sir, an absolute honor for our department and also our college in general to have you here with us today. So I will not take any more time and I will pass this over to Shubhit sir for the plenary session. So over to you, sir. And thank you once again from all of us for accepting our invitation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Doipal, because this has been a long time in the planning. And if I remember, you had contacted me several months back when things usually were chaotic on the work front, insofar I was concerned. And this is a chaos that never dies down. There's always something or the other which crops up, which takes immediate attention, and so and so. But let me tell you that it gives me a very great pleasure to be with you, my young colleagues, this evening. I have to thank, first of all, the principal madam of PHK Jain College, Professor Sengupta, Singh Sengupta, mostly Singh Sengupta. I have to thank the head of the Department of English, over here, Oindrila Sengupta, and of course, the other members of the department as well. Now, let me tell you what I'm going to talk about today. First of all, this is not going to be a very formal classroom kind of a session, because frankly, doing a classroom lecture is something which I'm sure none of you really want from me, and neither is it something that I would enjoy giving. So what I will really do is to give you a talk on my feelings, my take, if you want, on the very major topic that you have spread out in front of me, Indian literature and culture over the last 75 years. Now, we all know that, it's impossible to talk about Indian literature and culture for 75 years within the space of 50 minutes or so. So I will obviously restrict myself. First of all, I'm going to restrict myself to a discourse on Indian English literature, because that is the point that we all have in common. We are teachers and researchers in the field of English studies in India. And so that is going to be the one way in which I'm going to try and wall myself up from spreading myself too extensively. The second thing that I'm going to do is, as I said, this is not really a very structured lecture, but this is more in the form of a conversation, more in the form of a discussion with you, in which I get to share some of my feelings and perceptions about what has happened to Indian literature over the last 75 years. So that is what I'm going to try and do over the next few minutes. Now, I'll have to start off by saying that, it's very easy to compartmentalize, but Indian literature's English is something which is so flexible, so fluxile, let us say, that it's very difficult to compartmentalize this and say, okay, these are the years in which this happened, these are the years in when that happened, and so on and so. So I am going to gesture towards a kind of a teleology, a kind of a progress, if you want, in which I'm going to suggest that, there were certain developments, a certain evolution, because evolution, of course, is a very key word that you quite rightly include in the title of these seminars. So I'm going to talk about evolution, yes, but once again, I am not going to give you a kind of a history of history of Indian English literature lecture. That is, I'm not interested in giving dates and names and saying, okay, 1947, this happened, 1959, such and such a person wrote this novel, 1953, such and such a person wrote this poem. I don't want to do that. Because you see, I'm sure if you remember those who are still students, I'm sure you don't really like history of literature, do you? When we were students, this was something that we had to consume with good reason. I'm not saying that it was useless or unnecessary. It was very important. But once again, it's not something that you really feel very happy about reading and ingesting, and because you have exams to give and so on and so. So what I will be doing is a kind of a panning across, like a camera panning across a scene. I'm going to pan across the whole 75 years that we were talking about, from 1947 to, if not the present day, at least near about or close to the present day. That is what I'm going to do. Now, as I'm going to do this, also let me tell you that, if you really want to talk about the present, there's no way you can talk about the present unless you talk about the past. So obviously, your moorings, your anchorings are in the past, and you have to start off with a kind of a historical perspectivization of what happened or what took place in the terrain of Indian writing in English. IWE, as you all call it nowadays. Okay, so where do we start? Actually, you see, if you really ask me, I think we're going to start some way back, because the first point that we're remembering is that, it has been observed that the very first English literature textbook that was ever published in the world was published in Kolkata, India. That's interesting because you see, the person who edited this volume of poetry was a man called Captain D.L. Richardson, David Lester Richardson. And as we all know, David Lester Richardson is the man who really introduced English studies in India and certainly in Kolkata around the 1835. That is immediately after Macaulay's time, Macaulay's famous or infamous Minutes on Indian Education. Now, what was the name of this book? This book was entitled by Richardson as British Poets from the Time of Chaucer to the Present Day. And this was published in 1840. So once again, you see, this is a landmark here, let us say, 1840, and the publication of this book. And interestingly, this book was published by the Committee for Public Instruction in Kolkata. I'm going to say that there was a politics behind this. I'm going to imply that the very fact that the title of the book said British poets from Chaucer to the present day, that is also significant. Why? It's significant because you see two of the poets who Richardson decided to include in this volume of poetry were, number one, Henry Louis Vivian Desrosiers. So Desrosiers is the first poet to find a place in the sheets of this particular book. The other one is more interesting. That was Kashi Prasad Ghosh. And Kashi Prasad Ghosh, as you all know, is a pioneering, what was at one time called Indo-Anglian poet. Kashi Prasad Ghosh was a disciple of Desrosiers, and once again, the very fact, that these two Indian poets are being included in an anthology that is called British Poets indicates that there's a kind of an inclusiveness that Richardson wants to indicate by publishing this book. Now, is it all? Not really. Because you see, if you really think of it, what was the audience of this book? Who were the readers of this book? As I said, this book was meant for reading by students in Kolkata/Indian classrooms. So you see, this was a textbook. And obviously, a textbook is certainly something which is or has a function of canonicity. That is, you see, if you have a textbook, you are including certain poets and you're leaving out certain other poets. And by including certain poets, you are suggesting that these poets are poets who are good, valuable, important, worthy to be studied, worthy to be read, and so on and so. So there's an element of canonicity in the whole idea of this man, of certain poets being included. And as I was saying, this is very interesting over here because Desrosiers, Kashi Prasad Ghosh are both being featured in the pages of this volume. Now, as I said, the target audience of this book were Indian students, right? And that is also very significant because you see, Indian students are therefore coming to English or Indian English writing in a kind of a continuity of tradition of sorts from Chaucer to what Richardson calls the present day. So there is this movement forward, there is this inclusiveness, something that I was wanting to talk about. Now, apart from classroom use, where was English literature written by Indians read? Or rather, who read these works of Indian literature? Well, first of all, you see, English literature in those days, that is, the early or the middle of the 19th century, was being consumed in India by people who had sufficient English to be able to read the language fluently and without any obstacles. These people were also obviously, English educated, and these people wanted to find out what their countrymen were doing in using this new language, new to them at least, language. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. There was this marvelous fantasy written by Kailash Chandra Dutta. Kailash Chandra Dutta wrote this futuristic novel which was called A Journal of the 48 Hours of the year 1945. And this was published in 1835, in which he's really talking about an uprising of Indians against the British. And, this is a novel which in a sense is deeply subversive of colonial rule. But because it was 1835, that is pre-First War of Independence, pre-Indian Mutiny, I suppose it didn't create much of a splash. And so the public authorities, the colonial authorities, took it in their stride. But once again, this is an important first work of English fiction in India. And then, of course, there's a very famous Rajmohan's Wife, which was authored by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. And the two journals in which these two texts were published, the first one, Kailash Chandra Dutta's work, this was published in a journal called the Calcutta Literary Gazette. And Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's work was, as you know, published in another journal which is called the Indian Field. So you see, these journals, English journals, which are being hospitable to new writing in English, this forms a territory in which new talent writing in English, Indian talent, could find their feet, could find their voices to be expressed. So you see, this was a tradition. By the middle of the 19th century, Indians were writing English. But don't forget that, Britishers or foreigners or Europeans writing about India far outnumbered Indians writing in English. So you see, the entry of Indian writing of English has to be looked at from the perspective of the terrain in which you see the maximum amount of writing about India is being done by uh, white people, not by Indians like us. Now, is that all? Not really. Because you see, let me make please allow me to make a brief digression at this point. If you think of the Western intellectual tradition, literature comes from the root word letters, which really indicates that literature is something that is, number one, written. In fact, it is a kind of a text. And as you all know, it was Quintilian, wasn't it? Quintilian had said that a text is really a kind of a textile. In other words, Quintilian said that if you want to write something, you've got to sit down and think out your words and phrases, and then you must use your words and phrases and weave them into a text. So the word text in English obviously goes back to Quintilian and his idea, conceptualization of a fabric of words, a fabric of articulations, and so and so. On the contrary, in India, in the old tradition of India, we have a completely different idea or ideation about literature. What is that? This really goes back to maybe the Middle Ages, when you see literature, Shahitya. In fact, if you think of the word Shahitya, what does Shahitya mean? In the Indian tradition, it is being said that you have two things. You have Shabdo, which is, of course, the signifier, and you have Ortho, which is, of course, the meaning. And the idea is that Shabdo plus Ortho, or in other words, Shabdo Shohit or Ortho is Shahitya. Once again, Shohit. From Shohit, Shabdo, Shohit, Ortho, you have Shahitya. So in the Indian tradition, you see, you have a different kind of a conceptualization. The conceptualization is that there are certain signs that you use, certain reference that you use, certain words that you use, and these words contain their own signification, their own meaning, and Shahitya is a combination of these words and their meanings. So you see, what I'm trying to show you is that there's a kind of a divide in the way, at least in the classical past or in the neoclassical past, Indians looked at literature, and this is different from the way the Western people had an attitude or a perspective on literature. So this is a divide that we should be keeping in mind when we are looking at Indian literature in English. You see, now, the more senior I get, there are issues that come to my mind. For example, you see, most of our writing, certainly a great amount of our teaching, is centered on derivative discourse. That means, you see, when we go into the staff room, what do? First of all, we use a methodology of teaching which is essentially, very new criticism, because we really do a close reading of texts in the classrooms, and our pedagogy is such that we follow the traditions of one school of teaching that was developed in the West maybe 70, 80 years back or even more. Now, you see, this is perfectly all right. But I think it is also important for Indian researchers to look behind the parameters of the way in which Western critics look at literature. Why is that? There's something that I call locational hermeneutics. Hermeneutics, I'm sure all of you know, is basically the question of meaning. How you make meaning, where meaning is made, who makes the meaning, who authenticates the meaning, and so and so. And so you see, what I'm trying to get at is that If you think of a professor in Harvard or any college, say in England or the United States, and if you think of yourself, there's a difference. The difference, of course, is you see one of location. Because if you're teaching, say, Milton, your teaching of Milton is necessarily going to be different from the teaching of Milton by a Western academic. This is inevitable. Why? Simply because of what I call locational hermeneutics. The fact is that, you as a teacher in India have your own experiences, have your own, if you want, visions, equally as your own limitations, and your teaching is going to be different from the teaching by a teacher in the Western world, which is all the more important that we try and devise a kind of a indigenous, our own method of looking at these Western texts. Okay, this is not a simple task at all. You cannot, I mean, at one time, 20, 30 years back, it was fashionable to apply, say, rasa theory to Western literary texts. This was an oversimplification. But once again, you see, maybe there needs to be a balance between the way we teach literature, and most important, the way in which we teach Indian writing in English. Now, okay, that was a sermon, right? So over with the sermon, let's move on to what I was talking about. Well, what was I talking about? I was talking about, you see, issues like, as I said, the whole notion of Indian literature in English. And I would suggest that there are certain progressive stages in the evolution of this brand of literature over the past 75 or so years. Now, what are these stages? Once again, you see, let me indicate that these stages are only very tentative, and they are there only to indicate a certain taxonomy, if you want, by which you can make sense of the very vast, very fluid reality of the Indian literary tradition. So these are not signposts, but these are maybe, in a sense, mileposts. Mileposts that are telling you, okay, these are ways in which we can understand, we can divide our experience of Indian English literature. What are these? The first category or the first milestone I would talk about is a stage that I call a stage of initiation of canonicity. Now let me explain this. Initiation of canonicity. You see, this was the time in which Indian English literature was coming into its own. Earlier on, Indian English literature had not been taken seriously, particularly by our colonial masters and essentially by vast numbers of Indians themselves. That is, you see, Indian English literature was a quiddity and oddity, something which is a kind of a mimicry of the Western productions and so and so. And so no one had given any importance to this kind of new writing. But in the 1930s to maybe the 1940s, the late 1940s, there came about, you see, the writing and the publication of Indian fiction in various Western countries. And as you all know, you have these figures of, say, R.K. Narayan, Mulk Rajanand, or even before that, Raja Rao. And you see, these were the authors who were really writing and publishing Indian fiction, not in India, but in the West. In other words, you see, there was a kind of a recognition of this output. And this recognition is the first stage towards the establishment of canonicity. That Indian literature is something that has or can be included in a canon of English literature throughout the world. This is something that started at this point. And don't forget, these are the years just before the independence. And as we all know, the independence, which was a political event, obviously had an enormous influence on the writing and the standardization of Indian English writing. The reason is simple. You see, with independence, India becomes not a subordinate territory, but a nation. And with the rise of the idea of a nation, the literature or the culture of that particular geographical territory becomes also important. Now, to put it simply, you see, it's like this. If you think of it, earlier on, in the earliest phase, we had something called Commonwealth writing. Okay? Commonwealth writing changed into another term, which is called Indo-Anglian writing. From Indo-Anglian, we have narrowed it down to talking about Indian writing in English. So once again, you see, when you talk about Commonwealth literature, the whole idea is that the writing of this country, the writing of this nation is part of a Commonwealth of writing. So a very general, a kind of a diffused identity for Indian writing in English. Then, when you translate it to Indo-Anglian, the problem was, what did you do with, say, the English writing that was proceeding from other parts of the Indian subcontinent? Say, Pakistani writing, for example. Or later on, after the 70s, Bangladeshi writing in English. Would you still call it Indo-Anglian poetry or Indo-Anglian fiction? You couldn't. Therefore, you see, the need came for a greater specification when we talked about the new term that we use nowadays, Indian writing in English. And once again, the very definition, the very categorization of Indian writing of English as Indian writing in English is important. Why? Because it is actually indicating that Indian writing is being canonized in its own terms as something which is different from other literatures written in English the world over. Okay, so that was what I was trying to hint at. Next, I would say that after the first stage, which was the stage of the initiation of canonicity, the second stage was one of consolidation. What is this? If the first phase had been one marked by fiction texts, the second saw the development of Indian English poetry. And at the forefront of this move were people like P. Lal and Pritish Nundy. Pritish Nundy, as you know, was, and both P. Lal and Pritish Nundy, both of them, you see, were very influential figures insofar as the publication of Indian writing in English was concerned. Why? Pritish Nundy edited the very widely circulated journal or magazine in India, which was called the Illustrated Weekly of India. And in the pages of in the Illustrated Weekly of India, new authors writing in English found place to publish their short stories and more particularly their poems. For example, you see, people like Dom Moraes, for example, first found their names in print in the pages of the Illustrated Weekly of India. So these two pioneering figures, Pritish Nundy and P. Lal, both of them were responsible for the growth and the development of Indian English writing. P. Lal, why? Because P. Lal founded his very famous Writers' Workshop. And you see, Writers' Workshop would publish books of poems, books of essays, books of fiction, short stories, long fiction, everything. And quite interestingly, if you think of it, poets who later on became very important, like Kamala Das, for example, first found their appearance in print in books published by Writers' Workshop. So you see, these two people were like catalysts who brought about an enormous change in the circulation and the establishment of Indian English writing in Kolkata and in India, and of course the world. Okay, next, yes, once again, around this time, this is the year would be over 1957, Indians started winning prizes for their creative writings abroad. One example is, of course, Dom Moraes. Dom Moraes, you see, won the Hawthornden Prize for his first book of poems, which was called A Beginning. And this was published from London in 1957. So you see, winning of prizes is not only something which is important for the individual author. A winning of a prize by an Indian poet, prose writer, fictionalist, what have you, is an event of significance which goes much beyond the valorization of an individual. That is, you see, the individual, feels good. He or she gets some money if there's any money award with the associated with the award. But even more important, you see, the award givers are recognizing this talent which is coming out from a former colony. So once again, a kind of an establishment of the canonicity of the genre, of the theme of Indian writing in English. That is what I was saying is so important. Now, you see, once again, not everyone was very happy with the rise of Indian writing in English. For example, you see, one particularly acerbic critic had been Buddhadev Bose. Buddhadev Bose, as you all know, a Bengali poet, novelist, short story writer. And Buddhadev Bose contributed an article to an encyclopedia. The encyclopedia was published abroad, and the name of the encyclopedia was The Concise Encyclopedia of English and American Poets. And this had been edited by two famous people, Stephen Spender, the poet, and Donald Hall. Now here you see, and this was brought out in 1963. Here you see, in his article, Bose claimed that Indian literature in English did not have, quote, a real public in India, unquote. So once again, he's dismissing the idea that there are any real readers for Indian writing in English. And then he really moves into top gear. What does he say? He says in the same article, quote, Indian writing in English is a blind alley lined with curio shops leading nowhere. I'll just read that once again. Indian writing in English, Buddhadev Bose calls a blind alley lined with curio shops leading nowhere, unquote. In other words, you see, once again, a kind of a meaningless activity, a kind of a wastage of energy, because it's a blind lane, it's not going to progress anywhere. And curio shops, so you see, the productions by Indian writers of English are nothing more than, curiosities, something which are odd, and something which are significant only because they are odd. So this is a kind of a reaction against Indians writing against English. Now, interestingly, if you think of it, this is a kind of a continuation of the colonial perspective, because you see, in the colonial era too, Indians writing in English were regarded as curious specimen, as people who were, using the colonizers' language, and therefore to be looked at with a bit of amusement, perhaps, and certainly not to be centralized, but perpetually to be marginalized. So in other words, a kind of a othering of Indian writing in English. And post-independence, don't forget this is 1963, and post-independence periods, you see, there was this section of Indian intelligentsia, excuse me, which looks at Indian writing in English in exactly the same way. Now, but this was a temporary phase, because as we all know, Indian literature started flourishing, burgeoning even, and once it was there was no stopping it. It went on for a very, very long time, and is still continuing very vigorously even today. Okay. Yes. Right. At the same time, you see, there were some people who reacted strongly against this. P. Lal, for example, was then bringing out a journal called Literary Miscellany. And in the Literary Miscellany, he launched a survey of people who were either for Buddhadev Bose or against. And the reactions of people who wrote in English, he published as an anthology. Even more importantly, he also suggested that Bose was wrong in the sense that, people, okay, let me put it this way. This was P. Lal's point. P. Lal said that a truly national literature in India could only be a literature that is written in English. Why? His argument is that you see, regional literatures in the various Bhasha languages, vernacular languages, regional literature in the various Bhasha literatures are not truly Indian. Why? Because you can have a Marathi literature, you can have a Punjabi literature, you can have a Tamil literature, you can have a Bangla literature, but these are very restricted in the sense that they are limited by their own sub-nationalism. Okay? So you see, literature written in the Bhasha languages are sub-national. And by the same logic, only the literature that is written in English can be truly national. Because the medium of English is going to transcend all linguistic barriers, all linguistic constraints. Okay, so this was P. Lal's reaction once again in the middle of the 1960s. Now I'm going to jump to 1983. In 1983, you see the very respected literary critic, Indian literary critic, Meenakshi Mukherjee, had this to say in a book chapter. She says, and I quote, "What it means to be an Indian is not a question that troubles the Marathi or the Bengali writer very much. The need to define oneself and uh, and uh, uh, and an object and as an object of specific elements of one's cultural identity is usually the consequence of coming in contact with another culture. The writer in the Indian languages does not often have an exposure." Am I audible? Yeah. Okay, I'll just read the quotation once again. This is Meenakshi Mukherjee, 1983. This is what she's writing. "What it means to be an Indian is not a question that troubles the Marathi or the Bengali writer very much. The need to define oneself and analyze the specific elements of one's cultural identity is usually the consequence of coming in contact with another culture. The writer in the Indian languages does not often have an exposure to another culture with sufficient intensity to worry about these problems." In other words, this is regionalism versus nationalism. The idea is that people writing in the vernacular languages and the Bhasha languages are essentially limited in scope because they don't have a complete awareness of a wider reality outside their own lived experiences. And here she is suggesting the Indian writer in English has this opportunity or has this ability to transcend narrow parochialism, to transcend, to go over sub-nationalism. So you see, Indian writing in English is being essentially politicized, and that is of significance. Because you see, this is something that comes back in waves over and over again over the 75 years that we are talking about. Is Indian writing in English truly Indian? If it is not truly Indian, the opponents would ask, what is truly Indian? Would you say that a regional literature is truly Indian? And obviously you can't. And so the logic is, it is only Indian writing in English which is truly national in scope. Now, the other way in which Indian writing in English flourished is through the use of the English language itself. Now you see, starting with Raja Rao, who had agonized over how to use a foreign tongue and to express through a foreign tongue a sensibility, a feeling which was typically Indian. Starting from there, you see, the use of Indian English, or rather the use of English by Indian authors, happened to open out a great deal. For example, you see, if you think of it, in contemporary authors, starting maybe even earlier than that, but starting at least with Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, you have a kind of a chutneyfication of the English language, which really indicated that An Indian writer writing in English is using the local Indianized flavors, the grammatical categories, sometimes even transliteration of proverbs and everyday statements and sayings in English. Once again, you see the typical English of the British, something that we used to call received pronunciation. Remember, BBC English. Now that went out of fashion. And now you see the spiced Indian air. No, spiced Indian air, this is of course Shakespeare. The spiced Indian air blew through the English language that Indian writers were using. And this is, I think, of great significance because you see that Indians are using English with a great deal of convenience, a great deal of, let's say, flexibility, and a great deal of ease. And that means with language and linguistic usage, the literature itself is changing. Till at the present moment, you see, an Indian writer in English has got a whole range of registers to express himself or herself through. The new writer can write English whichever way he wants to write it. And there are no constraints, there are no, raised eyebrows if he does experiment with the English that he is using. Now, at this point, let me go into another digression. Now, you see, one of the things that we have to notice about Indian writing in English is that this is slightly different, maybe, from, say, Western or Anglophonic writing in English. Why? Because you see, if you think of Anglophones, Britishers, Americans, white Australians, white Canadians, and so write in English, they really started off from phonos, that is, from the sound of the words. That is how you learn your own mother tongue, don't you? You hear the sounds and you learn the language. Now, so we can say that, you see, with other people using English, particularly in the English-speaking native countries, there's a transition from phonos to logos. Logos is the language itself, to textum. Textum is a text. So you see, with the other nations in which English is the first language, there is a transition from phonos to logos to textum. Contrarily, we in India, we learned English not from hearing or not by hearing English in our families, but by learning English in our schools. Isn't it? So you see, in schools, you were taught English, you were encouraged to read books in English. And so you see, our involvement with English didn't start at the first stage, the phono stage. It started at the logos stage. And so from logos to textum, this seems to be the journey of Indian English. What I'm trying to say is that, you see, this means there are certain radical differences between our English and their Englishes. What is it? The first thing is, of course, you see, we are learning English from the page, not so much from the sound. And therefore, you see, our English has a typical flavor to it which doesn't exist in the English of an American or of a British writer. So there are certain changes, differences, let us say. It also means that, you see, when we use English, we are in a sense not entirely at par with the native English speaker. The reason is because we have learned English from the page and on the page, our English is at a slight delay from the English of the native speaker. The reason is, you see, everything comes down to us in print after a lag of a few years, maybe certainly a few months, after it has been published in the West. Which really means, you see, our English may have a regional flavor to it, a typical smell to it, which is different from the way in which English is used in the Western world. Right? So Indian English is certainly a special kind of an English, and there should be no problem in acknowledging this. Uh, uh, yes. Next, you see, if you really think of it, what is the target English readership in India? Very largely, it is still textbook oriented because people read English not so much for creative or enjoyment purposes. The vast majority of English of Indians read English for learning purposes, pedagogic purposes essentially. So textbooks are written in English, they read that. Notebooks are written in English, they read that. Bazaar notes are written in English, they read those, and so on. So, which means you see, there's a kind of a cultural divide in the reading habits of Indians in India, the reading habits of English in India today. A large section of the population doesn't read for pleasure, and a vast majority maybe reads English for entirely practical purposes, for the gathering of information, for the extension of knowledge, and so and so. And that's once again another point that we've got to keep in mind when we're talking about the evolution of English writing in India. Now, I had mentioned that there were uh, uh, two stages already. The first stage, I had said, was the stage towards a kind of a canonicity or the consciousness of a canonicity of English, Indian English writing. The second stage I called was a consolidation stage. And I would suggest that the consolidation stage, in which you see English writing in India was being consolidated, this is a stage that extended till about the 1970s. After that came the third stage. The third stage I call and the stage of experimentation, which really ranges up to maybe, say, the year 2000. You see, in this phase, Indian writers are experimenting. And not only fiction writers, even and most particularly poets are experimenting with the language. Earlier on, once again, if you think back to Kashi Prasad Ghosh or even Derozio, the poetry that they are writing is very basically imitative of Western models of poetry. Now, once again, later on, this changed because people are now more open to nowadays the new kind of a poetry, the new kind of a literature that is being produced is far more experimental. And this is something that continues for a long time. And this is what I was trying to indicate. 1 minute, yes. Excuse me. Right. So the first stage as a stage was a stage to proceeding towards a kind of a canonicity. The next stage was a stage of consolidation. The third stage was a stage of experimentation. And finally, you see, now we have the new stage, which is the stage of transnationalism. What is that? You see, the fact is, Indian writers in English are no longer restrained geographically to India, our nation. Some of the best writing in English is coming from expatriates, from Indians who live abroad. And there's this enormous list of people. Just to give you a couple of names, Amitav Ghosh, for example, Kunal Basu, for example, Saman Rushdie, for example, okay, Anita Desai, for example, okay, the Canadian author, what was her name? Banerjee. Anyway, forget the name at the moment. Okay, Himani Banerjee. Himani Banerjee, for example. All of these are Indian writers who are non-resident Indians. And some of the best writing is coming out from them. Then again, there are people, not necessarily fiction writers, who, transit between nations. Think of someone like, say, our own Omurto Shen. Once again, here is this gentleman who is an Oxford Don, writing in English, Bengali roots, Indian sensibility, Indian identity, And so you see, you have this new generation coming up, which is, you know, part Indian, part international, sometimes people with Indian roots like Jhumpa Lahiri, but with an American or a foreign citizenship identity. So you see, much of the writing is coming out in India from these people, which really means you see nowadays, thanks to internet, thanks to instant communication, thanks to technology, you know, these bounds are being slowly eradicated. And so there is no way but an Indian writer writing in, say, Bengal, Maharashtra, Chennai, wherever you want, is writing English who is not at par with a writer who is writing abroad. It's all become one. Okay? I would also like to add that you see, there's been several new developments over the last 2 decades. For example, the rise of popular literature. I mean, you know the names, don't you? Chetan Bhagat, astonishing success. There are people like, what was his name? Datta Durjoy Dotto. Okay. Now, once again, I mean, I have, I did a bit of research on Chetan Bhagat, and so I literally studied his novels to find out what makes them tick. Durjoy Dotto I tried reading, but I don't know, I think the fault's mine. I found him impossible to read. Okay, first of all, I have objections to the titles of his books, which are, I think, one whole sentence long. And I don't know why people read them, but I mean, I'm suppose they must be, his own fans who do read this. Then again, you see, there is Indic mythological books, the whole Amish Tripathi tradition. And that, once again, is very popular writing in India at this moment. Apart from that, you see, there is journalism. Journalism is, journalism in English, I mean, so which is writing, of course, is once again a very important component in Indian writing in English today. And not only that, you see, you also have inspirational literature. Robin Sharma, what was the name of the book? The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. These, you see, are self-help books. And as you know, the whole tradition of self-help books really started off with Benjamin Franklin in America, 19th century once again. And nowadays, you see, inspirational writing is a mass market. It is worth billions of dollars the world over. And if you think of it, even very old texts, like say Dale Carnegie's How to Make Friends and Influence People, they still sell by the thousands all over the world, okay, every year. So you see, inspirational literature is another category, that is literature written in English that finds consumers the whole nation across. So you see, these are new developments of English writing that are taking place in the last 2 or so decades. And once again, it's important to note that there is a readership, there is a market, there is a very important chunk of people who like reading this and whose perhaps only interaction with the English language is through the medium of such works. There's also, you see, non-fictional prose written in English. For example, Arundhati Roy. For example, Amitav Ghosh, the great derangement, for example. I referred to Amartya Sen, The Argumentative Indian, okay, Problems of Identity. So all these volumes are written in English by Indians, which are being read seriously, avidly by readers here in India, people like you and me, and people like the persons that we already know. So all this is taking place in India at the moment. You see, I think I've talked long enough, and let me quickly try and wrap it up. Now, the person I'm going to wrap up with is once again an Indo-Anglian poet who you may not have heard about, but once again, a very significant person. This was a man who died several years back, about 17 years back. This was a man whose name was Shankar Mukashi Punekar. Now, why do I mention Shankar Mukashi Punekar? Incidentally, Shankar Mukashi Punekar is a Kannada writer, and he has won prizes for writing in his own, the Sahitya Akademi Purushkar, for example, for writing novels in his own mother tongue. But he was also an English language poet. And the reason I want to refer to him is because he wrote this magnificent poem, hilarious, serious, visionary, all at the same time, a poem called An Epistle to Dr. Macachan. Now, let me explain. Dr. Macachan was David Macachan. David Macachan was a Westerner who settled down in India. He worked in the Department of Comparative Literature of Jadavpur University. Not only that, he was a kind of an anthropologist of sort. And you see, nowadays that we go and visit the temples of Bankura are because of David Macachan. You know, David Macachan had literally discovered these temples, covered in ruins, covered in greenery, in trees and shrubs, and he had literally resurrected these temples from the ruinous conditions that they were to be found. And so you see, he was a man of substantial merit, substantial contribution to our own culture. At the same time, you see, Macachan had written an essay in which he had denigrated, he had criticized Indian writing in English. Now, once again, this is typical because you see, in the Western sensibility, in the Western tradition, you have many people who, deride Indian writers of English. The other example that comes to my mind is a man called, once again, a journalist, Malcolm Muggeridge. Malcolm Muggeridge wrote a book of essays which he calls Tread Softly, for you tread on my dreams. Okay. Now, in this book, this man, Malcolm Muggeridge, has an essay in which he calls By Gosh. What does he mean by gosh? Actually, you see, there was an Indian academic, a professor in India, professor of English in India, who was Professor Ghosh. Professor Ghosh had been to England. This is once again in the early 1950s. And obviously, it was a kind of a dream come true to him because he had been teaching English in India for 30, 40 years. And so going to England was a special occasion to him. And he wrote a very romantic travelogue about his trip to England. Malcolm Muggeridge, writing in London, found this to be very funny. And so By Ghosh turns into By Gosh. Okay? And here he says that he started off life by teaching English in a college in Kerala. And he said it was very incongruous because when he was talking about Milton, he could look out of the window and see that the agricultural fields were being cultivated by men wearing loin cloths. He also said that Indian students had this habit of writing down everything that he said in class. And so he found it funny that the Indians are taking to English in this way. Okay, so you see, there was this anti-Indian writing sentiment in the West, which was very much there. And David Macachan had written this very acerbic essay in which he had criticized Indian writing in English as a kind of a new Babu English. And Mukashi Punekar, who was himself an Indian writing poetry in English, decided to answer back to him. And the answer came in the form of this long poem, which is called An Epistle to Dr. Macachan. And in this epistle to Dr. Macachan, Mukashi Punekar makes some very interesting points. What he says partly is that English, the English that we speak, we have learned from Shakespeare and from Milton. So this English is more pure English than the English spoken by Englishmen in their own country. Okay, why? Because the Westerners have lost contact with Milton and Shakespeare, but we were brought up on a diet of Milton and Shakespeare. And so our English, arguably at least, is a better, a more, let's say, canonical English than the English used by the Britishers themselves. And then he, with a marvelous leap of imagination, he contemplates that Indian English is like Peggotty's Ark. You remember Dickens, Peggotty? Peggotty's Ark, okay, is immobilized on the ground. So he's thinking that and once again, he is using the ark in two ways. Number one, as a vessel, and number two, as you see, ark in the Jewish scriptures, that is the container in which the sacred scrolls are kept. And so he says, Indian English is that ark. It is Peggotty's ark. And one day, Indian English is going to sail across the seas and reach England. Why? Because the Englishmen will understand, will realize that the English that they are using is no longer a pure English. And the pure English can only be recovered, can only be found, can only be discovered in a country like India. So Indian English is going to energize British or Anglophone English in the future. Now, this is of course very imaginative, but I would like to suggest that this is perhaps not without its grain or kernel of truth. Why not? Well, look at the most innovative, in a sense, the best writing in English that is being produced today. Is it being produced only by the British authors? Certainly not. It is being produced by writers of English the world over, in the former colonies, in Africa, in India, and other portions of the globe. So the Indian writing in English that we are now doing is, once again, something that has already established itself in the world map. And this is something that has happened in maybe the last 20 or so years. And that is important because as we move forward into our 100th year of independence, we will find that English has become more strong, more creative, a better means of expression, and certainly more valuable as a literary medium. And so the future is in front of us. We don't know what is going to happen. But what we can say is that the birth of Indian English can never be put down. The flourishing of Indian English can never be stopped. And the evolution continues. And maybe a future will come when Indian English is going to become like a future Superman, a super language, which is going to be there in a major way and playing a major role the world over. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, any observations, arguments, etc., and Deepayan, if you could, I'm using my mobile phone, and so if there is any questions on the chat box, it'll be too small for me to read off the screen. So you could quickly, interpret.
Sir, thank you for this interesting session.
Wonderful lecture. So actually, Swara will be taking over from here, and she will moderate the session. Over to Professor Swara Thakur.
Love.
Thank you, Deepayan. Thank you, sir. The session was very interesting, and some of the points that you made, actually, I was also not aware of them. So it's enlightening for me too. It was very, very interesting. Indian literature is something that generally people do not give so much of value to compared to Western literature, but it is so rich and deep. It has such a long tradition that we really need to focus more on it, specifically Indian writing in English. That is making Indian literature more popular nowadays rather than writing in regional languages. So it's a way in which Indians can express themselves and reach out to a global audience. So it's a very, very interesting field. I would request the audience members, if you have any queries, please post them in the Google Meet chat box and the YouTube chat stream. I'll relay those questions to sir. So there is one question that has been asked by Shreya Das. In the context of purity, what would you comment on authors from the Indian diaspora?
Okay, you mean linguistic purity, I'm sure. Now,
Yes,
right. You see, the first observation is that, purity is a very dicey term, a very ambiguous term, Because what do you mean by pure? I mean, if you're talking about standards, is the British standard the only standard in the world? To put it simply, you see, why should I speak English like a typical Britisher does? Now, of course, there is a practical reality to it, and anybody who has been to say Britain will know this. That if you speak English to the ordinary people, they say the taxi drivers or the people who man the buses or the tourist information officers and so on. So these people are not really very highly educated. And if you want to explain things to them, you have to put on a kind of a fake accent, right? But with the professors in the best universities in England, there's no need of adopting a fake accent. Our English works marvelously, and there's no problem whatsoever in communication. So you see, the point is once again very nationalistic. Why should I speak English like an Englishman does? Okay, so there are no absolutes, there's no yardstick of purity. The moment I acknowledge that there is a yardstick of superiority or inferiority, I'm indicating that, okay, I'm inferior and you are superior. Right? So this is something that, really raises my hackles. And I don't think this is, the notion of purity is something that is important or at least even relevant in today's world, in which there are so many different kinds of Englishes.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll just check if there are any questions in the YouTube chat box. Okay, somebody has posted some feedback. It is really an incredible lecture as usual. Okay, Shaumen Uthasini. Her name is Shaumen Uthasini. Okay, yeah, she's very happy with the lecture that you gave. She has given a very elaborate feedback. Okay, there is one more query that a person, Meeta Bandopadhyay, has. She's saying, in the modern scenario with the internet and YouTube, children are learning English directly from the foreign tongue earlier than the books. So what do you think about it?
Well, once again, I think you're right, because it is true. You see, now with the expansion of communication and the channels of communication, it's a lot easier for children to, watch an English film and pick up the language, and not only the language, even the accent from the film. Using YouTube, once again, it's the same thing, because you get a direct exposure to the way English is being spoken in various parts of the world. The other good thing, of course, is you appreciate the fact that, once again, there's no standardization of English, and that the Australian YouTube that you're watching, or the New Zealand YouTube video that you're watching, okay, is going to be different from, say, the typical British one. For example, I mean, this is something that occurred to me just now. In New Zealand, they don't say egg. EGG is not egg. They say eek. No, which is acceptable, because that is the way they pronounce this particular word. And, if you watch this, or if you know this, or if you've experienced this either in reality or more probably in virtual reality, it's perfectly all right. So you understand that your English is not inadequate, your English is not wrong, your English is not, Babu English. Okay. So once again, up the internet.
Okay, so that query has been answered. Any other query? Any of you have any other query? Please let us know. We'll forward that to sir. Okay, I don't see any other query here. I think everything is clear to everyone. It was such a lucid lecture that you gave and very interesting points that you made. So it was a very good learning experience for all of us. I don't think there are any other queries. So ma'am, would you like to say something? Principal ma'am?
really a wonderful lecture that I have ever attended. Really, because I don't I'm not a student of literature. I'm in the English, but a student of science. But really, I have enjoyed, and I came to know very new things and about Indian literature, difference between Indian and Western literature and English. Definitely, you have rightly said, sir, that we have really learned English from page, not by hearing. That's absolutely true, and that is basically that is the main reason that we are not. The interest that actually we are. Uh, we are not actually found it interest in the learning the English literature or like that, because in some point of time we are really our learning is not complete, because you know, sir, that in West Bengal, in most of the cases, the schools, the government schools, they don't have really good teachers of who basically the teaches English. You know, you were aware of that. So in that case, I myself from a government school, but really I have I miss the opportunity of learning English in that sense. Means because we have started learning English from, you know, sir, class 6, and all the time, you know, in that sense you were right that I have learned English by reading the storybooks, and after means class 6 or like that. So really, and the one of us, I don't know is a student or not, pointed rightly that our students, they're learning English from internet, and that is where that has become very dangerous, you know. So I don't know whether we can we can motivate them, how we can motivate them in learning English and learning literature, whether it's Indian or Western. Another thing is, sir, what do you think about the translation? Because I have studied many books which are translated Western. The Western classics are being translated in by the Indian authors, and I have gone through several books. So, what do you? What is your opinion regarding that, sir? The translation and all that. That I
Okay.
like.
You see, first of all, translation happens to be vital. To historicize this, let me indicate that in Europe, the Renaissance took place because of translations. You cannot have an explosion of knowledge unless there are translations.
Yes, sir.
And you see, the other thing is, houses or publication places like Sahitya Academy, for example, are, I think, doing a sterling work in this, because what they're really doing is to unify India through a process of translation. For example, I can't read Oriya, I can't read Tamil, I can't read Telugu. And if I want to understand what is being written in literature, or rather what literature is being written in these languages, the only recourse that I have is translation. Right?
Okay,
So
sir.
you see, translations are very, very important.
Important.
And once again, English, because it happens to be a common language with so many Indians, I, as a Bengali, I can read a book in Punjabi, I can read a book in Assamese if I want to, by using a translation. And what translations are really doing are to expand our mental and our cultural horizons. Because
Yes.
you see, when you read, even in translation, a book, say, which is written in a dialect or in a different tongue altogether, you're not only reading that book, you're taking on a culture, you're assimilating a culture, you're understanding, appreciating a new culture, which is entirely different from your own, about which you are not familiar. And so you see these interconnections, these bridgings, if you want, a bridge from one perspective to another. This is what translations are all about.
Okay, sir. So absolutely necessary, because it's required, actually. Anyway, thank you, sir, for
Thank you.
your nice lecture and all that.
And thank you very much also our faculty members also, because they are very busy with their regular schedule of conducting both online and offline classes. They are quite under pressure. Still, they have managed to arrange this kind of lecture, and I think all the participants have also benefited out of this lecture. So thank you once again.
And Professor Thakkar, may I say that thank you for doing this lovely interactive session, for conducting
Sir,
this
there are
lovely-
2 more queries in the chat box.
Okay. Okay.
I'll just put them forward. Mr. Chakraborty is asking that V.S. Naipaul, Jhumpa Lahiri, they are often not categorized in the group of Indian writing in English. So why is it justifiable? Like, why aren't they included in this category of Indian writing in English?
Well, you see, this inclusion of these writers in the category of Indian writers of English, this is a practice that I am echoing, number one. Number two, you see, they're Indians insofar as their heritage is Indian. With the case of Jhumpa Lahiri, she is only a second generation Indian living in the USA. And if you look at the themes of her books, if you look at the plots of her books, or even her characters, you will find they are characters, themes, plots, etc., which are essentially Indian in spirit. Isn't it? So you see, this means that they have a kind of, 2 feet in 2 different worlds. One in their own Indian heritage, however long it may be, and number two, in their present Western avatars, let us say. And so, because they have and because they write of Indian realities, Indian perceptions, Indian feelings and sensations, Indian experiences, and so on, I would be generous enough to include them within the category of Indian writers of English. At one point, if you think of Jhumpa Lahiri, at what point does she turn into an American writer? Okay, and what qualifies her to be an American writer and not an Indian one? Can we make these divisions, these borders? Right.
Yes, sir, I got your point. It's not possible to distinguish them, what is American and what is Indian in their writing. It's not possible to do that. Okay, so there is an observation that Dr. Prashant Ghoshal is making. He's saying that regional Indian languages, tribal myth and nature as a part of indigenous writing is creating a new genre altogether, as we find in the writings of Mamang Dai, Temsula Ao, Mona Zogt. So isn't it a proud moment for us that these are coming out from the people who were marginalized both in colonial and pre-colonial times? So this is the observation.
Okay, let me add to that. You see, fortunately, these writers, many of them are personally my friends. Okay.
Okay.
And let me say one thing. This is a new body of writing that is coming out from the Northeast, which is a very rich and vibrant, and not only not only tribal culture. For example, there's a whole category of Indian writing in English which is called curfew literature. Curfew literature is really indicative of the curfew which was clamped in several of the northeastern states, particularly Mizoram, during the times of the Mizo uprising. Okay, and which really meant that after 5 o'clock, no one could be seen outside their homes. This created problems for young people because you see, young lovers could not meet each other at any time of the day apart from the daylight hours, which was, of course, inconvenient. And a whole, body of literature came up, which is called curfew literature. In Assam, once again, there was a kind of an anti-nationalist literature, well, not really anti-nationalist, but literature against the operations of the Indian security forces in Assam. In Manipur, as you know, the Assam Rifles polices the state, and the Assam Rifles have occasion to indulge in several unsavory episodes with the Manipurian people. And once again, there's been literature, some of it written in English, which has emerged out of this. So you see, this is one of the greatest strengths of India. This is a place, unlike, say, the West, where you only have Donald Trump and nothing else. I'm exaggerating, but I'm exaggerating for purpose to make a point. You see, unlike Britain, where once again you see there is no longer cultural heterogeneity, but rather a kind of a solid, stolid, middle class environmentalism of economy. Unlike that, you see, India is a place where there's so much new things happening, so much experimentation going on, so much new experiences being recorded in the medium of English. So you see, and this I think is very important because it means that the Indian culture, or rather the English writing culture in India, is alive, kicking, and thriving, all because of our own indigenous cultural trends.
Okay, sir, I'll just take one last question from the chat box. This is by one of our ex-students, Chandravali Shorkar. She's asking that in the recent days, we mostly get texts by new Indian authors which are deprived of cultural or social influence and more about trends, the current trends which are going on. So it will eventually affect the standard of Indian English literature. And she's also adding to this that nowadays you have this combination language, Bengali plus English or Hindi plus English, this mixture of languages which is happening, which is really popular on social media platforms. So what will be the impact on Indian writing in English in future because of all these things?
Right. Okay, I'll give you a twofold answer. Part of the answer is going to be serious, part of the answer is going to be a little funny. The serious part is, yes, you're right. New kinds of writing are developing, particularly on the small screen, on the large screen, the computer and the mobile phone screen. And I think that's good. The point about, a deterioration, a kind of a movement towards a falling standard, there's one major cure for this, and that is time. You see, by time and in time, the bad literature is going to sink into oblivion. And the good literature is going to survive and be enshrined in the memory of the human race. Okay, that was a serious part of it. Okay, now the second part, the more jocular one, there was this there was this mobile phone joke a couple of years back, some more than a couple of years back really. It said, it's a joke which read, first, how do you send roses to the moon? How do you send roses to the moon? And the answer when it came, this was the day of the bird. Many of you know that. The first panel showed think. And then you scrolled and it said think once again. A third thing followed, and then finally it said, say, gulab jamun. Right? Now this is interesting. Why? Because it really impacts on what we are doing now. What we are doing is technically known as code switching. Switching from one language to another, using components, even lexical components from one language into another. Okay, this is done. And you see, in the Gulab Jamun joke, you will find exactly the same thing. The point, of course, is that if you want to appreciate this joke, you must know at least two languages. That is English as well as Hindi. A man who knows English, an American or a British, for example, won't make head or tail of this joke. We will. Also, there is the cultural iconicity of the sweetmeat that has been mentioned, Gulab Jamun. Gulab Jamun is a typically Indian, pan-Indian, I should say, okay, mithai. This is something you see that, say, 50 years ago maybe didn't exist in Bengal. Now it does. The reason is, of course, this is a sweetmeat that can be found in major parts of England, of India, okay, including the so-called Hindi heartland, isn't it? And so you see, by talking about Gulab Jamun and by assuming that the reader of this joke will know both English and Hindi, okay, you're really coming into a kind of a very complex cultural blend, don't you? Okay, it is not, how do you say, send, say, Rasgulla to the moon. Rasgulla is still a very identified Bengali sweet, despite the people of Odisha claiming it to be their own. It still is, our property, intellectual property, let's say. Okay. So you see, this is happening, yes, and I think this is perfectly all right. But once again, this is a phase of experimentation. For example, you have SMS novels, don't you?
Mhm.
So,
Yes.
or you have SMS language, HV instead of HAVE, to an example. Okay, and I remember a vice chancellor of a university in Lucknow, okay, being very agitated. I mean, this gentleman was a retired major general. Okay, so very stern, strict, and so and so. So he said, "You know something which is happening, sir?" I said, "What's happening?" He said, "This student sent me an application and it's written like this with SMS language." Okay, so you see, frankly, I'm very accommodative of these things. Okay, these things will happen whether you want it or not, and it's almost impossible to suppress it. I'm sure many of you have got answer scripts which contain at least some elements of SMS language, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
So what does one do? Is this English? Is this not English? If it is not English, why isn't it English? Okay, these are larger issues that come up. And how does one fight against so many people who are using this, doing this?
Okay, sir, because we don't have so much of time, so we are not going to take any more questions because I think there are a few more. But more or less, generally, they're asking almost similar things, which you have already answered. So I'm not relaying those questions to you now. Oindulati, do you want to say something before I move on to the vote of thanks?
Yes, I just want to thank Sir for such a nuanced lecture, and it actually is so encouraging and feeling very hopeful to be a participant, and it reminds me of my UG days, that one of my teachers said that the more you want to appreciate your literature, you have to open your arms, and this is a simultaneous process. So once again, sir, it's really an encouraging lecture that gives us hope that we are really the participant to this growth, which is coming in future. Thank you so much, sir, for your precious time.
Thank you. It's been an enjoyment for me as well. And I hope you enjoyed what I had to say.
Yes.
Yes,
Goodbye
sir,
then.
definitely. Sir,
Yes.
I'm going to deliver the vote of thanks.
Oh, sorry, sorry. I'll stick on.
No, it's okay, sir. So, ma'am, should I start my vote of thanks?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, respected guests and dear participants, on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to extend a hearty vote of thanks to our honorable speaker, Professor Dr. Shubir Kumar Dhor, for accepting our invitation and sharing his thoughts about the evolution of Indian literature and culture in the last 75 years. Thank you, sir, for taking out time from a busy schedule to address our audience. It was a very enriching and stimulating session. We all enjoyed it thoroughly. And it was very interesting for me to interact with you at this level on a virtual platform. Thank you so much. I got to learn a lot from you today.
Okay, then.
Yes, sir. I would just like to thank the audience members also for their cooperation and patience. And we hope to organize many more lectures in future. Thank you to Principal Ma'am for always inspiring us, giving us ideas to conduct different webinars that will be interesting for our students. And I would also like to thank our patrons who have supported us in conducting all the webinars and events of our department and all the events of our college. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. Goodbye and good night. Thank you,
Thank you,
Madam
sir.
Principal. Bye.
Good morning. The participants, I would just like to tell you that I should be sharing the feedback form link in the chat box. So please do not leave. The link will be shared in the chat box here and on YouTube. Click on the link to fill up the feedback form and your e-certificate will get generated automatically and go to your email. So please be very careful while filling up your feedback form, because that information will reflect in the e-certificate. Don't make any spelling mistakes, because you can't fill up the form twice. So I've just posted the link in the chat box. Please go ahead and click on it and fill up the form.